The cameras were rolling, the studio lights blazing, but nothing could prepare the audience for what happened next. Simon Cowell, the man with the ice-cold stare and the sharpest tongue in television, the man who had reduced thousands of hopefuls to tears with a single word, was suddenly the one who couldn't stop crying. On live television, the notoriously unshakable music mogul broke down in a moment of raw, unfiltered emotion. It wasn't a staged reality TV moment. This was real. And it all stemmed from one person, the young singer he once called one of the best voices I've ever heard. Before we uncover what really happened, tell us in the comments, what do you think is the biggest misunderstanding about this story? It was a moment that stopped the world. Not because of a spectacular performance, but because of a spectacular lack of one. The tiny figure stood frozen in the center of the stage, surrounded by a cavernous auditorium packed with thousands of people, all holding their breath. The backing track was still playing, a ghostly echo of what should have been the defining moment of a young life. Courtney Hadwin, the shy teenager with the feral, soul-shaking voice, was not singing. Her arms hung limp at her sides. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. The judges, including a visibly confused Simon Cowell, exchanged glances. This was not the girl they remembered. The first time the world met Courtney Hadwin, she was a 13-year-old from a small town in England, barely tall enough to reach the microphone stand. She looked like she was about to faint from stage fright. Her hands trembled as she held the mic, her voice a barely audible whisper when she introduced herself. The audience braced themselves for another forgettable audition, another shy kid who was about to be swallowed by the colossal machine of talent television. But then the music started, and something miraculous happened. The frail, nervous girl vanished. In her place emerged a force of nature, a tiny hurricane with the raw, gritty soul of Janis Joplin reincarnated. Her rendition of Proud Mary was explosive. It was primal. It left the audience gasping. Simon Cowell, who had seen it all, sat up in his chair with an expression of pure, unadulterated disbelief. He called her a very, very special talent. He saw something in her that he hadn't seen in years, a star. That golden moment, however, planted a seed. A seed that would grow into a blinding spotlight, one so intense it could melt the resolve of even the strongest performer. The pressure became immense, a tangible weight pressing down on the teenager's shoulders. She was no longer just a shy girl singing for fun. She was a viral sensation. A guaranteed winner in the eyes of the public. She was Simon Cowell's new favorite, the girl who represented the very essence of the X Factor. Suddenly, every note she sang was judged against the memory of that first, magic performance. She was expected to be a phenomenon every single time. She was an artist trying to paint masterpieces while thousands of people screamed for her to repeat the one that had gone viral. The silence that followed her audition was not the silence of failure, it was the silence of a girl trying to find an escape from the cage of her own success. And as she stood there on that stage, unable to produce a single note, the audience didn't know that they were watching a tragedy unfold in slow motion. A tragedy that would, years later, reduce Simon Cowell to tears on live television. Because this moment of silence wasn't just about one lost performance. It was the beginning of a story that no one ever expected to hear. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe so you never miss our next documentary. The moment Howie Mandel's hand slammed down on that golden buzzer, Courtney Hadwin's life changed forever. Golden confetti rained down from the ceiling as the teenager covered her eyes in disbelief, her father rushing onto the stage in tears to embrace her. It was the stuff of fairy tales, the shy, trembling girl from a small town in County Durham who had just conquered America. But what the cameras captured was only half the story. The other half was invisible to the audience at home, hidden behind the glittering facade of instant fame. Simon Cowell, ever the architect of stardom, wasted no time in anointing her as something special. He called her a trendsetter, a performer who would tell a whole new generation of people what rock and roll is all about. Howie Mandel went even further, comparing her to a young Janis Joplin and declaring they were watching a superstar in the making. These weren't just compliments, they were prophecies, carefully crafted pronouncements that transformed a 13-year-old schoolgirl from Peterlee into the front-runner of an entire competition. But prophecies, as history has shown, come with a price. The journey had already begun years earlier, long before the golden confetti touched the stage. At just 11 years old, Courtney had found her voice under the guidance of vocal coach Julie Miles, who fed her songs that resonated with her young soul, the raw, gritty classics of artists like Janis Joplin. She had already competed on The Voice Kids UK, mentored by McFly's Danny Jones, reaching the final before narrowly missing the top prize. Those early experiences should have prepared her for the spotlight. But nothing could have prepared her for the machine that was about to swallow her whole. When Courtney stepped onto the America's Got Talent stage, she didn't just audition for a show, she auditioned for the world. Her performance of Otis Redding's Hard to Handle became a viral sensation, viewed millions of times within days. Social media exploded with comparisons to Janis Joplin and declarations that she was destined for superstardom. But with millions of eyes came millions of expectations. Each subsequent performance was judged not on its own merits, but against the memory of that first, earth-shattering moment. She was no longer Courtney Hadwin, the shy girl who happened to have an incredible voice. She was Courtney Hadwin, the phenomenon, the guaranteed winner, the next big thing. And Simon Cowell, the man who had seen it all, kept raising the bar. After her performance of River Deep, Mountain High in the finals, he told her that every time you perform, people are going to remember you, a compliment that was also, in its own way, a sentence. He placed her alongside past teen champions like Darcy Lynn Farmer and Grace VanderWaal, drawing a direct line between their victories and her presumed future. The message was unmistakable: you are expected to win. The weight of that expectation was invisible to the millions watching from their living rooms, but it was very, very real to the 14-year-old girl standing in the middle of that stage. When the results came in, the world was stunned. Courtney Hadwin didn't win America's Got Talent. She didn't even place in the top 5. She finished 6th. Magician Shin Lim took the crown, and Courtney was left to process a defeat that felt, to many, like an impossibility. The cameras captured her disappointment, but what they couldn't capture was the quiet devastation, the feeling of having given everything and still come up short, of having carried the weight of an entire nation's expectations and collapsed under it. Simon Cowell's reaction to that defeat would later become the stuff of legend, but at the time, it was just another chapter in a story that was far from over. Because what happened next would shock everyone, including the man who had once called her a trendsetter. If this story surprised you, share it with someone who would enjoy uncovering forgotten Hollywood stories. The defeat on America's Got Talent was supposed to be a footnote, a momentary setback before the inevitable coronation. Simon Cowell himself had promised that if she didn't win, he would sign her to his label. And true to his word, in December 2018, Courtney Hadwin signed a record deal with Psycho Music and the newly reformed Arista Records, the legendary label that had once represented Aretha Franklin and Whitney Houston. She was 14 years old, had nearly 300 million views across social media, and the most powerful man in the music industry was personally championing her future. It seemed like the beginning of a fairy tale. But fairy tales, as Courtney would soon discover, have a way of turning into nightmares when you least expect it. The pressure began immediately. In January 2019, she appeared on America's Got Talent, The Champions, debuting her first original song, Pretty Little Thing. Simon Cowell told her it was bloody fantastic, noting that something had changed in her: more confidence, better interaction with the audience. Mel B called her a champion. Heidi Klum compared her to a lioness roaring. But despite the glowing praise, Courtney didn't make it to the final round. It was another disappointment, another reminder that the world's expectations were impossibly high. Behind the scenes, the reality was far darker than any televised defeat. The online abuse that had started during her Voice Kids days had intensified into something truly cruel. People called her a shouter, not a singer. They mocked her appearance, her style, her very authenticity. At school, the bullying was relentless. Classmates laughed at her, called her names, told her she sang like a boy. Her grandfather revealed that people were quite cruel online. Her mother admitted that the criticism made her scared of the spotlight. But nothing could have prepared the public for what Courtney would reveal years later. During a period of intense pressure following her television fame, she was found with scissors to her throat. She was not trying to end her life, she was trying to destroy her voice. She believed her gift had become a curse. The panic attacks were so severe that she would shake uncontrollably, struggle to breathe, and vomit before every performance. The girl who transformed into a roaring lioness on stage was secretly falling apart, hiding a battle that no one, not even the man who had signed her, could see. Then came the phone call that changed everything. In the middle of the night, Courtney was told that Simon Cowell had decided to shut down Psycho Music. Everyone was jobless. Her release, which had been set for her 16th birthday, was cancelled. She had spent 2 years working on music, only to be dropped like a forgotten contract. The experience, she later said, really shook my faith in record labels. The industry that had promised her everything had left her with nothing, except the determination to never let anyone control her voice again. If this story surprised you, share it with someone who would enjoy uncovering forgotten Hollywood stories. The stage was set for what should have been a triumphant return. The cameras were rolling, the audience was buzzing, and Simon Cowell sat in his usual seat, arms crossed, ready to witness the next chapter in the career of the girl he had once called a superstar. What happened next would become one of the most talked about moments in live television history, not because of a performance, but because of its complete and utter absence. Courtney Hadwin walked onto the stage, her signature nervous energy radiating through the studio. The audience, familiar with her transformation from shy teenager to roaring lioness, waited with bated breath for the music to start. But when it did, something was terribly wrong. She stood frozen. The backing track played on, echoing through the cavernous auditorium, but Courtney wasn't singing. She wasn't moving. She wasn't the girl who had once stormed the stage with the ferocity of Janis Joplin. She was a terrified teenager, completely overwhelmed by the very spotlight that had made her famous. The moment stretched into an eternity. The judges exchanged confused glances. The audience grew restless. And then, the unthinkable happened. Simon Cowell, the same man who had reduced thousands of hopefuls to tears with a single cutting remark, began to cry. Not the polite, controlled tears of a judge moved by a performance. These were raw, uncontrollable tears, the kind that betray a man who has just realized something devastating. Because Simon Cowell wasn't just watching a girl freeze on stage. He was watching the collapse of a dream he had helped build. He had called her a very, very special talent. He had compared her to Susan Boyle, told her she was one in a million. He had signed her to his label, promised her the world, and placed the weight of his entire musical empire on her teenage shoulders. And now, standing before him was the result, a young woman who had been pushed so far past her breaking point that she couldn't even produce a single note. But here's what the cameras didn't capture. Behind the tears, behind the silence, behind the staggering failure of that live television moment, a different story was unfolding. One that Simon Cowell didn't see coming. One that would force him to confront his own role in what had happened to the girl he once called a superstar. Because Courtney Hadwin's breakdown wasn't just about stage fright. It was the culmination of years of pressure, years of bullying, years of being told she was the next big thing while simultaneously being torn apart by people who said she couldn't sing. The live television moment became a viral sensation, but for all the wrong reasons. Headlines screamed about Simon Cowell's tears, about the shocking collapse of a once promising star. But the question that everyone was asking, the question that would haunt Simon Cowell for years to come, was simple: what did he know, and when did he know it? The answer, as the world would soon discover, was far more complicated than anyone imagined. If this story surprised you, share it with someone who would enjoy uncovering forgotten Hollywood stories. The tears on that live television stage seemed to spell the end of a story that had begun with such promise. The cameras captured Simon Cowell's raw emotion, the awkward silence, the girl frozen in the spotlight. The headlines were brutal. The speculation was relentless. Courtney Hadwin, it seemed, had become the latest cautionary tale of child stardom, another bright flame extinguished by the very industry that had ignited her. The world looked away, assuming the story was over. But that was a mistake. Because while the cameras were rolling, while the world was watching Simon Cowell break down, while the gossip columns were writing their epitaphs, something else was happening entirely. Courtney Hadwin, the girl who had been written off, was quietly preparing the most powerful response she could possibly give. And it wasn't a tearful interview. It wasn't a desperate plea for another chance. It was an album. A complete, unfiltered, deeply personal statement that she had been crafting in secret for years. The story of what happened after that devastating live television moment is the part of the tale no one saw coming. It's the chapter that has left Simon Cowell, who once reduced thousands of hopefuls to tears with a single word, in what can only be described as a state of shock. Because Courtney Hadwin didn't just survive the collapse of her dream. She transformed it. She took the pain of that silence, the agony of that frozen moment, and turned it into art. At just 21 years old, she released her debut album, a body of work titled Little Miss Jagged. The title itself is a statement, a defiant embrace of her imperfection, her refusal to be packaged into the glossy pop mold that record labels had tried to force her into. The album isn't about perfection. It's about truth. It's about the scars no one saw, the bullying she endured, the pressure to be the 13-year-old AGT girl long after she had grown up. One track, You Only Love Me When I Lie, cuts deep into the heart of her experience, confronting the uncomfortable truth that the world fell in love with a version of her that no longer existed. The silence on that live television stage wasn't a failure. It was a chrysalis. And now, the butterfly has emerged, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Courtney Hadwin has stopped trying to be the girl the world wanted her to be. She's finally the artist she was always meant to become. And Simon Cowell, for all his tears, now has the answer to the question that has haunted him. Because the girl who couldn't sing that night is now singing louder than ever before. If you enjoyed this documentary, like the video and subscribe for more true celebrity stories every week.